Welcome to your weekend. I'm Mike Krause, editor-in-chief at CompleteColorado.com, filling in for John Caldera, who is, believe it or not, at Disney World in August, spending all of his money. He should be back here shortly. A little bit later, we're going to be talking about church security, hardening churches. But first, we're going to take a look at some fairly esoteric aspect of local government, and that is metropolitan districts. And to talk about metro districts first, we have Megan Schrader from the Denver Post. Megan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. You have a lot to say about this because you wrote a fairly significant spread for the opinion page on metro districts. And so we're going to get into that a little bit. So thanks for coming today. Appreciate it.
Great, yeah.
And Tim Leonard, former state lawmaker, and you dealt with special districts in your capacity as a lawmaker, but you also deal with them professionally, right?
Do. Yes.
And you mentioned that you're actually on the board of a metro district.
I was, yes.
Yeah. Very exciting. Okay. I'm a little bit worried that people are going to start clicking off their televisions because this is fairly esoteric aspect of local government. But let's talk about this. Metropolitan districts are a subset of the broader special districts that are authorized by state statute, right? And they do two or more things. They provide two or more services. And when we took a look at this last year at Independence Institute, we found around 1,600 of these metro districts. And their debt, and the reason we want to talk about them because they're not insignificant, the total debt of all these metro districts is over $19 billion, which needs to be paid back by taxes and fees. So this is a big thing. But first, let's start over here with you, Megan. You wrote a lot about this. Give us if you were going to give an elevator pitch to someone on what a metro district is and what the problem is, give it to us.
So a metro district is a way for local cities and counties to give taxing authority to developers. And developers take that taxing authority and run with it. And they maximize the debt on properties that they are developing so that they don't have to pay for that infrastructure. And then they charge huge amounts of interest on that debt 2 times. And it's property owners who eventually buy into these communities who are left paying that debt over decades. And often they have no idea what the debt was issued for. They have no control over it. And it is a huge impact to their property tax bill.
You mentioned the debt and the taxes, but they're providing a service that if they weren't providing it would be provided by a municipality or a county or something like that, or which traditionally would have been, right?
So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes this debt is issued for big infrastructure projects to help pay for, like, say, a share of widening a major arterial road that the county says, if you're going to build here, we have to widen this road. And some of the debt will pay for that. But oftentimes this is for interior development, roads, water, sidewalks, parks, that the developer traditionally pays for through the sale of individual house lots.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated.
No, this is hugely complicated. Dumb it down for us, if you can. Talk about metro districts, what they are. The legislature created these, right?
Yes.
And what do you see as, I mean, I understand that they're created to provide a benefit, and they were created to take a load off of local governments originally. Do you see a problem?
You know, my metro districts are great. I love them. I love a lot of special districts, but they're abused like anything else. They're used for projects, mostly land development projects that are too big for a municipality, right? Highlands Ranch, when that created, but there's 1,500, like you said. But they're too big. There's a lot of water, a lot of sewer, a lot of roads, a lot of parks, and maybe some amenities that the people want. And so I want my roads, and I want all these things really nice. And so a developer gets that taxing authority, is exactly right, to be able to lay this all out with double tax exempt bonds, right? Those bonds get sold, and the people who are developed get to pay for it. And that's really good, a free market way to say, hey, pay as you go. But it's abused on both sides. I mean, it's abused by the municipalities because they'll say, great, you build the roads. I don't have to. I'll still collect your other taxes like anybody else. But I won't build your roads. I won't put in your $300,000 traffic signals. I'm not going to build your parks. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that they don't have to do. And so municipalities are just as much to blame because they say, I'm sorry your mills are really high, but don't blame me, blame the Metro District. And so that's a way of them escaping from it. And then they approve these too easily. Maybe there isn't a high hurdle. Maybe there isn't contamination on the site or huge amounts of grading that has to be done or all this infrastructure has to be done. So they approve them too quickly and then they don't review them and they come back for bonds to be approved on, in some cases, BIDs, business districts, and they don't approve those. And they don't ask for independent counsel to review them. And there's a lot of players in all of this, right? There's not just the developers. There's bond counsel, there's special district authorities who write them, there's underwriters who sell the bonds, bond holders, obviously, contractors who get all the money from them, and then there's the taxpayer, the landowner. And everybody else of these 10 players, 9 of them receive money, but only the taxpayer is one paying for all this. And so that's where it stands it's very ripe for abuse, and we're seeing more abuse as this goes on.
Okay, you actually brought this up in your piece for the Post because you talked about Denver likes to approve these things. Denver does a lot of this, and so does the whole metro area. And what ends up happening is that there'll be people in Denver in one neighborhood or in a special district who are paying significantly higher mills on their property taxes than someone who lives a couple blocks away outside of a special district. Talk about what you found when you were putting together your piece.
So I found homeowners who, live just across the street and their mill levies were double, right? They're paying double the property taxes as someone who lives just on the other side of the street. And sometimes these overlap. And so you can find somebody who is actually in 3 different metro districts, created by the same developer to tax for different purposes. And so they're comparing property tax bills with their neighbors and they're like, what is this 15 mills for? And why don't you pay it? And it's all very unclear. And I think if you look at some of those tax rates, it's astounding.
Actually, I had a guy, it was funny, a guy sent me his property tax bill from Colorado Springs because he called and was talking about, and I just thought it was amusing, and he just said, I thought you might be interested in seeing what's happening. And this was his property tax, Colorado Springs took $150 last year. El Paso County took $272. That's not a lot of money. The school district took the lion's share, which they do in almost everyone's tax bill, $2,000. The Metropolitan District live-in was over $1,300. So this Metro District is essentially doing things that if it weren't doing it, either Colorado Springs or El Paso County would have to do it. And if that was the case, what would happen to tax bills? I mean, everybody's tax bill would go up, basically, not just people in the Metro District, right? Or they would have to.
Right, and that gets to be pretty unfair, right? If why should I in the north part of town have to pay for new development that's going on in the south part of town that needs a tremendous amount of work? So it's not that these are unfair in the sense of that, but when you get into the devil in the details, right, why are these bonds issued so high? Why haven't they been refinanced for lower? How was the money spent? That's the biggest thing I always tell city councils and town councils. When you're approving this, just look at the proceeds, just follow the money. Because if it's one of the biggest abuses that developers do is they use the word public improvements to include a very large thing. And one of the ones, because I do a lot of representation of municipalities that want me to negotiate on the other side of a developer that says, we want this project, we want this big retailer, but we don't want to have the taxpayers really take a lump for it. So I'll help negotiate it down, but they'll pay for public we call it public parking facilities, but they're parking lots in front of big box developers, big box retailers. And so then the retailer says, well, I can't pay your price for your land. And the developer says, well, what if I put in your parking lot for you? Oh, well, then I can pay your price. Yeah, but the parking lot isn't put in by the developer. It's put in by the Metro District, who has to be paid for by everyone, but the developer gets the land price increase. And that's this game that goes on that we need retailers to be able to say, you know what, I want that for free, but I don't, if you're abusing everybody for me, then tomorrow you're going to build somebody else's parking lot and not mine, and I have to pay for it. So there needs to be an even level playing field, and there's some solutions, but it takes everybody who's not receiving money to be able to
Everybody's
make it
now,
work.
so it takes people who aren't affected by this to get involved, possibly. And you actually,
Right.
you had one suggestion in your piece, which is just, let's just do away with these things. Talk about, I mean, that's always the solution, by the way, to lots of things that government causes, is to go back and undo what they did originally. Talk about that.
So the fear is, if you got rid of metropolitan districts, that developers would say, we can't afford to develop, or the sticker shock that residents would have now buying this lot of land would be so high that development wouldn't make sense. I don't buy that. I just don't buy it. I think developers are using this tool as a way to bring down the price of the lot and reimburse themselves for infrastructure developments kind of arbitrarily. And I still think that they charge market value for that lot, not over and above or under. So I think if we maybe we did a timeout and just waited to see. Like what would happen if we got rid of this tool and said, developers, you have to pay for your own internal infrastructure. If you want to develop that land, that farmland, put your own roads in. You will reap the benefits and increased value of each lot, and let's see if the finances work. And then if they don't, developers can come to the city council and say, here are the numbers. Here's why this isn't working. But that's not happening now. There's no transparency in what developers are making off of these deals, so that they can justify putting a lot of the cost of development on the backs of taxpayers.
It's interesting. You talked when we were chatting before the show. You were talking about that there are other potential solutions to where there's a problem. Talk about those. And one of them you said was that nobody wants, and one of them goes back to journalists like people at the Denver Post.
Right.
That none of these developers want their name in the paper as getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar, right?
Right. Well, and before I address that, but on Megan's issue, and I love the spirit of being able to say, let's call a timeout. But we did that with condominiums, right? We did that with the pendulum swing the other way, and everybody could sue everybody, and so no condominiums got built for years. And so it isn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because they are necessary, because you couldn't afford to do it. I run the numbers for developers. That's what I do, financial analysis, and they wouldn't work. Now, the hard part is once you put a metro district on top, the value of the land goes up, right? Because now you're able to do that. So there has to be a swing the other way. But the first thing is that these government entities, they call them sponsoring authorities, that give these, right, they have to do it with more discretion, right? Because the government officials that are elected and do this, they have the least to lose here. Right. But they have to be able to say, I want my budget to be able to spend what it is. If I authorize a metro district, that means I get more of my budget I get to spend on other things, recreational centers, things that aren't in the core function of government. So it takes bold elected officials to be able to say that we're not going to do that. We're going to be part of this. We're not going to approve it. But then they have to do all their other reviews. It also takes journalists to be able to expose people and say, and not just the developer in the paper, but next to his attorney that's whispering in his ear, hey, here's something that I just learned at a conference. I bet there's one more trick you can use. And that's got to be able to stop at the same time. But it also takes retailers, and I work with retailers, to push back and say, I'd go on this lot, except look at the numbers here. There was one that was up to 200 mills. Now, to translate that for everybody is 200 mills, that's 20% of your value is given to government entities every single year. You're renting your entire building for 20% at 200 mills. That's unbelievable. I mean, we're in some that 82 mills should be normal. Then you put 60 mills on top of that. You can see the difference. While the fire department's fighting for 1.5 or 2, developers are slapping on 50 plus 10 on top of there. And that's the part that retailers have to say, I want to look at your books. I want to be able to say, what is this going for? Because every year they can lower these mills. As it gets built out, they can bring them down. Not 50, now it's 40, now it's 30, now it's 10. We're doing that on a couple of projects as retailers. So those three entities need to be able to use free marketability to be able to control developers and really attorneys that are doing this kind of damage.
Megan, you're going to wrap this up for us because you've written on this. You're going to write some more on this. You said that the legislature created this. Have you ever seen any appetite at the legislature to try and take a swing at this?
I think there are the occasional lawmaker who this flashes up on their radar screen and they're concerned. But it's a beast to try and tackle. You know, the pushback from developers I got on my op-ed was large. They accused me of not understanding the system, of oversimplifying a very complex thing. I think that any lawmaker who tries to tackle this has to be prepared to face deep pockets that have millions of dollars on the line and just free revenue. It would be a battle, but I have faith lawmakers could do it.
All right, good. Well, good. I'm glad someone has faith in our lawmakers. Megan, thanks so much for coming.
Thank
Tim,
you.
thank you for
You've had a
coming.
pleasure.
You all stick around.